Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hello.
And we're back.
We are back.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone.
Literally one.
Our
Sorry,
one fan.
our
Thank you.
beloved fan. Yeah. So I don't know if y'all saw our Insta story, but beloved co-host and I.
We're down.
We got
down
the
for
Rona.
the count.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can still tell, but we aren't 100%, but we're
No.
back for you. We couldn't wait another week. We
Yeah.
couldn't have you all hanging on by a thread, wondering
Tearing your hair out.
Yeah, tearing your hair out.
Crying yourselves to sleep. I mean, we have a responsibility to our one fan.
That was a joke that you totally just
Did you say
glossed over.
terroring our hair? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay.
Listen, I've got COVID brain, like bad.
Yeah. So we're
disclaimer.
back, you guys.
Disclaimer about our nasally voices and the fact that I am probably going to lose my mind.
Yeah, I mean, we might go off track a little bit, and it won't be because of our normal going off track.
Like literally, if you hear a thud and we start playing Girl from Ipanema, then one of us has collapsed.
That's mean.
No, I'm assuming it'll be me.
I mean, that's sad.
Yeah.
I didn't mean mean.
No, I mean, I've
sad.
sweated my body weight like
Okay,
15
I don't
times.
think we need to detail.
You want to hear all the deets?
No, I think the listeners have had COVID.
Yeah,
So
listen.
I don't think that we need to be, the only people that understand
I do
COVID.
want to say to everyone out there, to those of you who have had this, boy, do I feel you. And to those of you who haven't, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
This sucks.
It does. But we're back, and we're ready.
And super grateful to, be recovering and to have just access to medicine and all that. I'm feeling very grateful these days.
I know. So, and, we're really excited to be back with this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially this episode, because this topic is near and dear to my dark, broken little heart.
Yeah, you really wanted to do this topic. So why don't you tell everybody what we're going to talk about today?
Yay. Okay, so today, everybody, we are talking about folk horror, which is honestly a relatively new term. It's a subgenre of horror that's received quite a renaissance in the last 10 years. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term, but maybe you're not quite familiar with what it means, what it encompasses. And part of the reason for that is it's still kind of being worked out. But that's what we're going to talk about today, our exploration of the genre and our recommendations, some dives into the...
Talk about some examples.
Absolutely.
And, some of the highs
and
of
lows.
the genre.
Nah, mostly highs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to talk about where the term originates? Because I have that information.
You know what? I know that you did a lot of work on the background and whatnot. And I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so the term folk horror originates with British director Piers Haggard.
Yes, Blood on Satan's Claw.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
yeah.
As a description for the 1971 film Blood on Satan's Claw.
You can put my Hannibal Lecter mask on me at any time.
The term came into critical discourse around a 2010 documentary called History of Horror, where folk horror was used to describe a loose collection of films from the 1960s and 70s that share a, quote, common obsession with the British landscape, its folklores, and superstitions, end quote.
Gentle listeners, I share this obsession.
Yes, you do very much. So I am going to probably dive into a little bit of the, the witches of it all. But if you want to jump in with some of your background and other information about folk horror to get our listener up to speed,
That
go
sounds
for
dope.
it.
Yeah. Oh, you mean right now?
Yeah. No, in the next episode.
Listen, we're getting back into this swing. There's going to be some awkwardness. I mean, sure. I think it's worth, before we dive in, to maybe spend a minute or two talking about what exactly is folk horror. What do we mean when we say that? I mean, what does that encompass? Because there are it's certainly up for interpretation. And I would make the distinction that not every folk horror is necessarily a fairy tale. I think those can be two different things. Folk horror has a very specific tone, a specific pacing, and some common themes that really pop up.
Would you say, though, that you can affiliate the term folk horror with, cultural lore or
Absolutely.
Seasonal storytelling?
Oh, certainly. What I mean to say is more like folk horror contains fairy tale and folk tale elements, but not every folk tale or fairy tale is a folk horror.
Well, because folk horror, it doesn't really have a moral to it, as fairy tales typically have some kind of resolution or
there's a morality tale. There's a lesson to be taught.
It's not a fable.
You're right. Although there are
lessons, but
there
I
are
don't
elements
think it's
that seem more like warnings.
Yeah. Or I would say that folk horror feels more ritualistic than it does cautionary tale.
Well, why don't we talk about a few common themes that pop up in what we would describe as folk horror?
Yeah, ritual.
Ritual, absolutely. Paganism. Where, the conflict of pre-Christianity pagan religions, animalistic beliefs. Not animalistic, animistic beliefs. Those are two very different things. Animistic beliefs, things like the Druids, the Picts of ancient Scotland and Ireland, when we're talking about Western folklore, to spiritual mediums of Southeast Asia. We're talking pre-Christianity, pre-Islam, basically the dominant religions of the modern era. And a lot of folk horror deals with the historical struggle between those two cultures. In some cases, conquering cultures integrated elements of paganism, such as Halloween and All Saints' Day being kind of taken from the Druid, the Celtic celebration of Samhain, and mixed in with Christianity to sort of make a new hybrid holiday. But
would you say that, folk horror is ritualistic and like more of a religious pursuit, or it's antithesis to religion?
It's more like
spiritual.
It's more like an antithesis or a conflict with modernity, I would say. A lot of folk horror centers around modern towns or villages that cling to the old ways. And you often see that conflict of the sometimes brutal rituals of old pagan beliefs contrasting with the age of reason, the age of science, the age of Christianity. So there's that conflict that occurs whenever one belief system starts to supplant another. But then there's also the very real historical conflict that the Catholic Church, especially, and later Calvinists and Puritans had with feminism and women fertility and things like that. So that really plays a central theme in most folk horror, that conflict between the feminine connection to the earth and to life itself and the more patriarchal system of modern,
Can I
organized
jump
religion.
in here? Because
Oh,
I
please.
really wanted to talk about that, the feminine aspect of folk horror.
It's inextricable.
Witches are often a part of folk horror, and Black Sunday, Inferno, Suspiria, The Evil Dead. I know that that's a little controversial for you, Evil Dead not being folk horror, but I'm just giving some examples of where you might see those witches, of the folk horror nods appearing. Historically, witches are seen as,
murderous,
evil, which is why they're a great vehicle for folk horror. And
I think
they represent an ancient threat.
Certainly.
Both with ritual and ruin.
The important thing to keep in context, though, is who made the decision that witches were evil? Who decided? Men. Well, yes, absolutely.
Men did.
I think
I'm not being like anti-men here. It's actually proven fact.
You're historically correct.
The women of the Wicker Man, for example, portray persecuted witches And they're not followers of Satan, but rather a female-centric pagan religion.
Yes.
Specifically a fertility religion, which is what you mentioned earlier with fertility practices. The Wicker Man ultimately celebrates feminine sexuality and fertility, and some of these ideas are said to inspire modern-day Wicca practices and other neo-pagan ideals in the 60s and 70s, like the Wicca women in the Wicker Man.
Well, it's also interesting to examine the changing attitudes towards spiritual beliefs in witchcraft, quote unquote, witchcraft through the years, where there were times where these women were seen as shamans and healers and integral members of society and of the village.
Well, there are definitely female-driven like groups and communities.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't until really, I would say that maybe the 13th century or so that
matriarchal cults.
Yes, the Catholic Church started to take a stand against those sorts of beliefs, believing that these primarily rural peasant pagan beliefs were a threat to the power of the Catholic Church.
So if you want to know sort of the origin of why witches have been displayed or represented in this way, it's witch culture ultimately came from male distrust of women. And you can see that in early Christianity and throughout the development of Christianity, and also in Greek myth, like with Circe and Medusa and the Stygian witches. You know, they all
Furies.
have that sort of, Medea.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And it's been really cool the last 20 years or so to see feminist writers reclaiming some of those myths and presenting them through a feminist point of view, giving a side of an ancient story that was always there, but really not given enough consideration.
Well, I'm sure you're going to talk about Dave Eggers and
Robert Eggers. Yes.
Oh, Robert Eggers.
Yes.
Right. Dave Eggers is a writer.
Yes.
And Ari Aster, but like that's the new wave of pagan and folk horror, and they really highlight folk horror more as the unknown, not so much as the, feminine horror of it all. It's more, I think, like Midsommar.
Well, Midsommar
shows feminine wrath as like the basis of celebration, though. They're like the grief and the wrath and the emotion that women often are meant to compartmentalize or meant not to express. That is actually something of great strength and power in that film.
Absolutely. Yeah. The moments of that movie that stick with me are the moments of shared grief where the community expresses collectively their pain. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it heavily plays into one of my favorite old Norse stories, The Death of Sigurd. Sigurd and Brunhilde were two famous heroes of Norse tales. And at the death of Sigurd, Sigurd's wife was unable to weep. She couldn't express emotion. And all of the people were trying to get her to weep for her slain husband, and she couldn't. She felt nothing. And it was Brunhilde, who was a hero of her own and also a lover of Sigurd, it's complicated, who went up to Sigurd's wife and berated her until she broke down into tears, and then they embraced. And this is from over 1,000 years ago, this story, and it's just an amazing. It's amazing to me how in touch the ancient cultures were with grief.
Yeah.
The grief must be expressed. It must be confronted and faced. You can't run away from it or it will poison you.
Well, think about how other cultures even, I'm not even bury, but like, I can't think of another word, but
suppress?
Like dispose of.
Oh,
no,
sure.
Dispose of their dead.
Oh, right. Yes,
when the Vikings will send them out to sea and light them on fire like a pyre, right?
Yeah. I mean, they would do that for like their honored dead.
Yeah. There's just other practices besides burying or giving a wake or...
you have the Mexican celebration Dia de los Muertos, where they integrate with they interact with their departed ancestors.
I mean, even in Jewish religion where you sit Shiva to honor the passing of somebody by taking a vow of sort of silence and repose.
This is maybe unscientific, but it does seem to me older cultures, such as Jewish cultures, ones that have thousands of years of collective history to draw from, have a very different, and I would argue more holistic and healthy way of dealing with grief and death than modern culture.
It's a ritual.
I feel like modern Western cultures, we fear death, we hide from it, we don't talk about it, we're uncomfortable with it, and that's understandable, but it is a part of life, and it's inextricable. And I would argue our finality and our deaths are what make our lives beautiful and meaningful.
Sometimes that's how people understand what you meant to them is after you die.
Sure.
Didn't you mention recently a horror movie about sitting Shiva?
Yes,
where the
yes.
body is not...
An incredible movie that came out a few years ago called The Vigil, directed by, I think the guy's name's Keith Thomas. He just did the Firestarter remake, which I heard was a bit of a misfire. But The Vigil is fantastic.
Was a fire
Firestarter? I didn't even mean that. No, The Vigil is fantastic. It's a small, contained, very tense horror movie, but a real exploration of grief, of guilt, survivor's guilt, and of faith, broken faith, restoration of faith.
Would you consider it a folk horror?
I would certainly consider it,
or like a nudge towards.
I don't know if I would call it folk horror, but it's certainly spiritual horror. It is from a distinctly Jewish and even an Orthodox Jewish perspective. But it's very accessible because the main character is he has lost his faith, quite understandably through past tragedy. So it's very easy for you to relate to this man who is doing something out of tradition and responsibility and financial necessity, but it's not like he is a man who spent most of his life in the Orthodox Jewish tradition, then fell away from it. So he has a deep well of knowledge and understanding, even though he doesn't believe at this time in his life. So it's really an accessible movie for both believers and non-believers. The Vigil, check it out. It's dope. I don't know if I would call it folk horror, but it does skirt the line.
Any other specific tropes within folk horror you want to mention?
My focus is on movies, obviously. That's kind of my thing. There are some stylistic similarities in what defines folk horror, and one of them would be the slow burn. Mm-hmm. Folk horror almost always tends to be a slow burn experience, which not everyone is into, and I totally understand that. I am. And I totally get it. I totally get why someone might not have the patience to watch a slow burn of a movie. Something like The Witch or, Midsommar, a little less so, but that too. Rosemary's Baby is a slow burn, but...
Here's the thing. Sometimes I have the patience and sometimes I don't.
Well, it does require
They're not
investment.
always my favorite films.
Absolutely. And I totally get it.
But when I am going to give some examples of folk horror that stuck with me, you'll see that I'm definitely drawn to folk horror. I absolutely think you are. It's my favorite kind of movie because of the investment you have to make. Now, when it doesn't work out, it can be a bit of a disappointment because you've just watched a bunch of movie and you've had the patience and it didn't go anywhere. But when it does work, and that's the other end of folk horror, is it's usually punctuated with just a bonkers denouement, like an ending that leaves you speechless, jaw on the floor, horrified and disturbed and thinking about it for weeks. Conan O'Brien essentially just said on, Summer S'mores with Conan and the Chill Chums
horror podcast.
He said that he didn't say the term folk horror, but all of the movies that he identified as being his favorites now, and saying that, he believes that horror is gotten even better and better. He definitely is drawn to folk horror. So
Absolutely.
If we ever talk to Conan, I want to talk to him about folk horror and how maybe we have some recommendations.
Now you're
for
spoiling
him.
our guest, Mr. Conan O'Brien.
Yeah, right.
Hello.
We wish. I wouldn't be keeping my shit together
No,
right
I'd be
now.
losing it completely. I mean, I've been a fan
Plus,
of that
we
man
have
for
COVID.
most of my
Not,
life.
we've just been exposed. We've been sick.
No, we
I know,
legit,
but we shouldn't invite Conan over right now
No.
to the studio.
And even I wouldn't even know how to do so.
Do you want to take a quick break and then we'll come back into our examples and recommendations of
I
folk
think
horror?
that idea is super duper.
Okay.
The world's a scary place. It only makes sense you'd want to keep your loved ones safe by slowly poisoning them just above the threshold of death. But the tricky part has always been finding the right dosage. You want to keep your precious darlings weak enough to need you, but not so weak you can't have a social life too. Don't get me started on overdoses. What a mess. Well, to all you concerned moms and totally normal boyfriends out there, have I got a wonderful product for you. Introducing Munchausen by Proxy Box, a home meal delivery kit guaranteed to keep your charges physically weak enough to never escape your loving home fortress. Each Munchausen by Proxy Box comes with a delicious pre-planned meal designed by our team of Sarin gastronomers to delight the taste buds and crush the human spirit. Choose from an assortment of meals, from our classic chicken a la strychnine to our gluten-free pesticide platter. Don't take a chance that your loved ones will venture out into the world and get hurt, or worse, decide they don't need you anymore. Keep them close and compliant, without the hassle or worry of looky-loos at the grocery store. Order Munchausen by Proxy Box today and get a free window sealing kit that neighbors won't notice. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse poisoning people because you are literally unlovable.
And we're back.
Yes?
And we still have COVID.
Oh, come on.
But enough about that.
Go.
Yes. How are we starting?
Oh, my God. We just discussed it.
I know, I forgot. I have COVID brain.
You are going to... You're going to talk about the backdrop movie.
Okay. Yes. So when we
welcome
talk...
back. And we're back.
And we're back this time. So I'm going to start talking about what is commonly referred to as the Unholy Trinity, which is a name I love. The three films that really kicked off the folk horror genre in movies. Now they are The Wicker Man, the aforementioned Blood on Satan's Claw, and Witchfinder General. So Witchfinder General is the first of them. Came out in 1967, directed by a young auteur named Michael Reeves, who very tragically died at the age of 29, shortly after finishing the film. It's maybe one of Vincent Price's best roles. He is extraordinary in this movie.
We love a little Vincent Price.
Yes, disclaimer, I'm extremely biased. I adore Vincent Price. Now, this role, though, is much more villainous and sleazy than a lot of his roles. It's not a campy role. He plays the real-life witch hunter, Matthew Hopkins, who, way back when, claimed to have a mandate from the church to be, quote-unquote, a witchfinder general. Now, he roamed the countryside with his horrible associate, John Stern, and murdered over 100 women in the name of God. Now, he was actually not given that mandate. The term Witchfinder General is something he made up, and the church eventually pursued him and stopped him. He died of tuberculosis in his 20s, which is great, but not so great. It's estimated that most of the witches executed in this period of time were done by this one asshole. So he was just a disgusting perv roaming the countryside during the English Civil War and murdering women because he felt like it.
Oh, boy. Sounds like a serial killer.
Pretty much. He was a sanctioned serial killer. Now, his whole thing was he wasn't interested in deeds. He would examine women for birthmarks. And if he found one, that was the mark of the devil, and they were done.
Wow. What about men with birthmarks?
Not as interested in that. Yeah.
Interesting.
You know, when you go to the Salem witch trials in New England, they were heavily influenced by the writings of John Stern, who, after Matthew Hopkins died, his assistant wrote a book on witchcraft and all that shit. And the Puritans of our great country murdered a bunch of women in Salem, and one man, the incredibly brave, heroic Giles Corey, who was crushed to death after refusing to testify against the women that were being accused.
Yeah, they weren't witches. They were just women.
And side note, I love Salem, Massachusetts. Beautiful town. Got a lot of great film festivals. But I've never been able to get over the discomfort of celebrating the brutal murder of innocent women by having like a kitschy Halloween party every year. I don't know, man. That just doesn't sit right with me. It just seems weird, you know? Like, they weren't witches. They were innocent girls.
Yeah. I mean, it is part of history. So
Certainly.
I think that's partially why. And
it would be nice if it were done with a little bit more respect.
Yeah. We don't yuck yums here, though.
True. So, a couple of things about Witchfinder General, the movie. It's a fantastic movie. Now, Matthew Reeves did not want Vincent Price in this role, and he made that quite clear. He refused to pick Vincent Price up at the airport, and Vincent Price said to the producer who picked him up, "Take me to your goddamn genius."
Can you say it like...
I'll try. Take me to your goddamn genius. That was terrible. So on the set, they clashed quite often. Matthew Reeves, the director, had a very specific vision, but apparently was not very good at communicating that in a way actors would understand. So he and Vincent Price got into a lot of fights. Quite famously, Vincent Price snapped at him one day and said, "I've made 87 films. What have you ever done?" To which the 29-year-old director said, "I've made 3 good ones." That's a pretty awesome comeback, and especially ballsy to say to a legend like Vincent Price. So during the filming, Matthew Hopkins insisted that Vincent Price shoot a flintlock pistol close to the horse's head that he was riding. And after Vincent Price learned that he had loaded a full blank cartridge into the flintlock to get a nice plume of smoke, Vincent Price didn't want to do it, even saying, and I quote, "You want the gun to go bang between the ears of this fucking nag? How do you think this thing is going to react?" Sure enough, it reared and threw Vincent Price from the horse. He wasn't injured, but he was pretty pissed. So in an act of petty revenge that was actually very contrary to the extremely professional way Vincent Price conducted himself, on the last day of shooting, Vincent Price showed up to set shit-faced drunk. I mean, just like stumbling, blinkered drunk, which caused Matthew Reeves to threaten to murder him. It was a big to-do. So anyway, the movie was released. It was a sensation. And Vincent Price actually wrote a letter to Matthew Reeves saying, "I finally understand what you were trying to do. I get it. And it works." He later said in interviews, "I would have happily given the director what he wanted if he just told me what he wanted." Matthew Reeves responded to this letter saying, "I knew you would understand," and then quite tragically died soon after that. So, you know, it's interesting to wonder what this young man would have done with the rest of his career. He certainly seemed like a difficult person to work with, but, I mean, I think that describes most filmmakers, especially of the 60s and 70s. So the other film that I'm going to get into in that unholy trinity is The Wicker Man. Now, The Wicker Man,
I mentioned earlier.
Yes. I'm sure you've all heard of it. I'm talking, of course, about the 1973 original directed by Robin Hardy and memorably starring Christopher Lee in one of his greatest roles as Lord Summerisle. So the fascinating thing about The Wicker Man is it stars Edward Woodward, who was, you might recognize, he was in Hot Fuzz. He was the original Equalizer on the TV show. Great British actor.
I mean, it should have really been called The Wicker Women.
Well...
Yeah, I know.
The Women in The Wicker Man. So Edward Woodward plays Sergeant Howie, who is this repressed, severe, very religious, dogmatic police officer who's sent to this island in the Outer Hebrides off the coast of Scotland to examine the failing crops there. Now, he is a man of science and reason who is there to warn them, like, the climate and the soil and all of this, your island is dying and it's never coming back. Now, he's also a virgin. He's a grown man, but he's borderline puritanical. So he goes to this island filled with these weird pagans and immediately...
Just pagans.
No, to him, they are quite strange.
Yeah,
to
him,
yes.
but, you know.
I don't mean to imply that paganism is weird, but to a Calvinist who believes in reason and God, the monotheistic God, this is as alien to him as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention Britt Ekland, the beautiful Swedish actress, plays the role of his temptress on this island. There's quite a famous sequence where she's dancing outside of his room, and he has these hallucinations, and he's really tempted. Now he fights this temptation. He fights the sort of what he thinks of as the backwards religion of this island, but to deaf ears. No one wants to hear reason and science. Lord Summerisle is promising them bounty and harvest if they appease the gods. Basically, it all ends pretty poorly for old Sergeant Howie. I don't think it's a spoiler to give away one of the most famous scenes in horror history. They put him in a giant effigy made of wicker, and it's the Wicker Man, with animals and sacrifices and fruits and offerings, and they set it on fire.
And they dance all around.
They dance all around, and they sing what is considered the first Western pop song, Summer is Incoming In, which was written, I believe, in 1239. And it was quite famous because it was one of the first songs that became an instant hit with the peasantry. And I'm actually going to try to sing a little.
Oh, no. I mean, yay. That's what I meant.
It's in Middle English.
Oh, yay. That's what I'm going to say every time from now on. Oh, so exciting. Let's hear it.
So,
let's hear it.
I'm getting there. So the basic tune of it and the first verse.
Gird your loins, everyone.
Summer is a coming in, luda sing cuckoo, groweth death and groweth met, and springeth death sing cuckoo. Oh man, it's tough. It basically means summer has arrived, loudly sing the cuckoo. The seed is growing, the meadow's blooming, the wood is coming into leaf, sing cuckoo. And it goes on, it's about harvest and fertility. It's all about that.
Yeah.
But it's a haunting melody. Summer is a coming in, loudly sing cuckoo. It's also one of the first examples of a polyphonic song, meaning kind of like Row, Row, Row Your Boat, where someone starts singing and then a couple bars in, another person starts singing. It's a 6-part polyphonic song that the peasantry
Please don't sing all 6 parts.
No, but they went bananas over it. It was the most popular song of the time, and it's the oldest surviving Western song like that. Also, not a religious song or not a Christian song. It's quite pagan because it focuses on fertility, the harvest, nature. And there's
it's not about like marriage and,
No, there's literally no mention of God in it at all. And around this time, songs without God in it were quite rare. Most music came from the church, and they were hymns that helped people remember Scripture in sort of a mnemonic way. But the ending of The Wicker Man is phenomenal. Christopher Lee gives the performance of his life, which is saying something because the man was a legend. And it was remade by Neil LaBute with Nicolas Cage and Ellen Burstyn. I highly recommend you watch it. It is...
The remake?
Yes. It is one of the most bafflingly horrible movies I've ever seen in my life, but it's bad to a degree that it is utterly fascinating. If you want to see Nicolas Cage put on a full-body bear costume and drop-kick women, punch people in the face...
I don't want to see that.
And, I don't think anybody wants to see it. And then scream about bees... Listen.
Oh, that's the bee movie?
Yeah. My eyes, not the bees. It's Nicolas Cage at his most bug-eyed crazy. It's a terrible...
Wow, that's saying a lot.
Yeah, it's a horrifically bad remake. But it's one of those movies where you're watching it and you're like, walk me through the decision-making process here. The fuck? So definitely see the original because it is an all-timer. So that's my recommendation.
So... one of the first exposures to folk horror is definitely The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. I've already discussed it in an earlier episode, so I'm not going to go into it.
But it can never bring it up often enough.
All of this just to say that the ritual human sacrifice is meant to ensure prosperity for the rest of the group is like a typical trope in folk horror.
Yeah, the idea of watering the earth with blood.
Right.
That nature comes from decay, it comes from death, and it's just a natural extension that if you want life from the earth, you have to give it some death.
So I am going to talk about a book called Harvest Home.
Oh, yeah.
And it's by Thomas Tryon.
Nice.
It's a psychological horror novel from 1973. It's about
same year The Wicker Man came out. What a year.
It's about Ned Constantine and his wife Beth, and they have a daughter named Kate, and they all relocate from New York City to an isolated village in Connecticut called Cornwall Combe. The village adheres to the old ways, which you mentioned earlier, which is, definitely a trope in folk horror, these ancient ritualistic ways, which means they don't use modern technology. They have limited access to the outside world. And the village celebrates corn in many of their festivals. And the most important festival takes place every 7 years, and it's called Harvest Home. There's an herbal doctor just called Widow, because she's a widow, named Mary Fortune. She actually saves Kate, the daughter's life, by performing an emergency tracheotomy. So she's actually versed in proper medical care, but she also uses a lot of herbal remedies and potions and things of that nature. There's a boy who lives in Cornwall Combe named Worthy. He's chosen.
These names are amazing.
I know. He's chosen as the new Harvest Lord. So that the 7-year Harvest Home celebration, every 7 years, typically they choose a new Harvest Lord, and they need to stay in that role for at least 7 years. He's not happy about it because he really wants to go to school for agriculture, because he thinks that he can learn the modern technology and acumen of our agriculture and bring it back to Cornwall Combe and really help with their harvest processes, more efficiencies, things like that. So he refuses the title and curses the corn.
Oh.
And then the whole town shuns him. And these are,
you don't curse the corn, people.
So Ned, the New Yorker that moved, helps him get the money to escape.
Which
So
I'm guessing doesn't make him super popular with the rest of the town.
Well, slowly Ned discovers that the women of the village practice pagan fertility rites to ensure the harvests. No one will tell him what happens at the Harvest Home Festival. In fact, men are actually sequestered during the Harvest Home Festival, so they don't really know what happens. And the village crowns a new corn maiden, who ends up being Beth, his wife. So I don't want to tell any more than that.
I don't want to know. I want to read this book.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's a great book. It's a horror for sure. And it really explores a lot of the themes of folk horror, so you can really understand, if you ever saw the movie The Village, or if you've ever seen any movie or read a book that takes a modern contemporary and places them in a non-modern community, it really exposes that level of understanding and lack of access. So when and you have access, and then you go to a place that doesn't have access, we're knowing what he's talking about more so. And now this was written in 1973, so there's not going to be cell phones, there's not going to be computers, we're still behind here.
It's an analog world. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So even if you read it now, it's going to be a technology mind fuck.
You might need to give some context to our younger readers who never grew up in that world.
Right. Well, there was a time where we didn't have computers or phones.
Well,
were
it's easy to say that
devices,
but you really have to
Wi-Fi.
You really have to put yourself back into that mindset.
Or internet, or streaming services.
Oh God, actually sounds pretty great.
No, it doesn't.
I
We're
love-
talking about movies and
No, but
access, and
I'm just saying,
you're
I
it
love
sounds
the.
great.
One of the reasons I think folk horror has made had such a renaissance in the last 10 years is because central to a lot of these themes are the conflict between the old ways and the new ways, where the new ways seek to supplant the old ways, and the old ways just want to survive. And there's that struggle. And I think a lot of us are experiencing that now as we come to terms with the fact that, hey, maybe the last 20 years of the Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things wasn't the best idea. Maybe there's a different approach.
Or there's a balance.
Exactly. A way to respect the old ways and integrate them as an evolution into modernity instead of trashing it and trying to erase it.
Well, it's interesting because a couple of my other recommendations are more contemporary, and then there's one specifically that talks about the conflict between fighting against modernity and, ritual.
We see it happening a lot in the United States now, where people from larger metropolitan areas become disillusioned. They move to rural areas with a sort of idealized expectation, and they did not anticipate that they're moving to a place with a different culture. And there's that clash where they're seeking something that is not real, that is
Sometimes
sort of an
the
ideal.
clash can form into a new way, though.
Absolutely. Sometimes it can't. Well, my next recommendation, it came out in 2015, and it is, in my opinion, the movie that really supercharged the modern wave of folk horror, and it's Robert Eggers' The Witch. Now, you and I saw this in the theater together, and we had quite a different reaction to it.
Yeah, I mean, I love Anya Taylor-Joy.
Oh, there's nothing not to love about her. She is so talented.
And the final scene in the movie
yes,
was amazing.
But it's an investment. Now, it's a slow burn of a film, but also, if you've ever seen any of Robert Eggers' movies, The Northman or The Lighthouse, you'll know that he takes great pains to write authentically within the time period he's representing. And I mean...
Pains is the key word there.
So what I mean by
Painful.
that is this takes place in the 1600s in a Puritan New England setting, and they speak that way. And that is not a modern affectation. It can sometimes... It's a little bit like reading Shakespeare, where you really have to concentrate because the cadence is different, the vocabulary is different, the references are different. So it's not, you can't pick it up with the same ease you would a modern conversation. Now, it's also, being a Robert Eggers film, steeped in symbolism.
And
every
a
scene
slow
in that
burn.
movie. Oh, certainly. But every scene in that movie is dripping with meaning. I adore this movie because it is magnificently shot. Featuring incredible performances by Ralph Ineson and Kate Dickie as Anya Taylor-Joy's parents. A very memorable denouement. The ending is bonkers. And it's like a perfect slow burn. It builds you up to a point of almost unbearable dread over the course of a while. And it's a slow burn, kind of like the frog in water trope, where you raise the temperature 1 degree at a time and it doesn't notice it's being boiled. By the time the ending comes, I was destroyed, just blown to pieces. I just want to mention one specific scene in this movie because it is my favorite. This movie really plays on the clash of societies. It's about a family that lives in a Puritan community, but they are so Puritan that the Puritans actually kick them out. So just picture that for a minute. These folks who lived with Puritans, who themselves were too rigid to live in England, they were kicked out of England for being too religious. This family is too religious for that group. So it's a pretty hardcore way to live. Now, there's an amazing scene where Ralph Ineson, he's basically come to terms with the fact that everything he's worked for is crumbling. Everything's falling apart. He could not protect his family from the evil of the woods, of whatever lurks out there. And he quotes from the book of Job, chapter 17, verse 14, "Corruption, thou art my father." The rest of the line, I believe, is something like, "The worm, my mother and sister." But he only gets out, "Corruption, thou art my father." And what that means is when Job says that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, he's basically saying, I am unclean. I will not be with my loved ones. I will not be in the light of God. I am at home amongst the worms, the decay, the rot, the filth. There is nothing for me but death and corruption of the flesh, of nature. And it's this moment where this deeply religious, faithful man who has kept an iron grip on his family is coming to the terms with the fact that despite all of it, it's all fallen apart, and he gets to see that before he dies. It's just, whew, gosh, I could go on and on about this movie, but I highly recommend it. It does take patience.
It's not for me.
And I totally get why. I don't disagree with you.
But here's some examples of what are for me.
Oh, I'd love to hear one.
So another book called The Whisper Man. It came out in 2019, written by Alex North. It's contemporary folk horror, which builds on urban legend. It's about a serial killer / kidnapper from 20 years prior in the town of Featherbank, known as the Whisper Man because he is said to whisper outside of the windows, luring his victims out. And so new widow Tom and his son Jake moved to this town of Featherbank, and they start to hear a boy disappears. Jake starts to hear the whispering, and it's a multi-generational take on folk horror. It's a town that identifies themselves by this folk tale of the Whisper Man, who is essentially just a man, but they give this weight to him that permeates the tone and the overall experience of everybody in the town. It's it is a cautionary tale, but it's also folklore and folk horror, so it blends all of those devices together.
I mean, that's all. It gives you several points of access.
Yeah. Absolutely. That was just a brief mention, but the actual book that I want to talk about is The Only Good Indians,
right,
by Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah,
came out a couple years ago in 2020. The author said that he took the title from something that Teddy Roosevelt said in the 19th century, which he said, "The only good Indians are dead Indians." So as a member of Blackfeet Nation, the Blackfeet, they're indigenous Native Americans located on the east side of Glacier National Park in the Blackfeet Reservation, which is currently home to 17,000 plus members of Blackfeet Nation. They were once feared plain warriors, and historians believe they were forced out of their ancestral grounds by white advancement. So this is just a common tale of how white advancement came in and murdered and took over the grounds and the land of the indigenous and Native Americans that lived here before. So this group, the Blackfeet, moved west. They're one of the only Native American clans to have moved west. And they have, their name is thought to have come from their long journey across the prairie, essentially blackening their moccasins. So the Blackfeet. So the book, The Only Good Indians, is a novel. It's about 4 Blackfeet men who went hunting. So it's a contemporary start to the novel. They went hunting in land that is reserved only for tribe elders. And since they're the youth of the tribe, they're prohibited from hunting there, but they went hunting there anyway. They discover a herd of elk and kill them all. One refuses to be killed, so one of the men goes and slays this elk.
This seems like a really bad idea.
Yeah. So and then when they're dressing the elk in the field, they discover that final elk that refused to die was pregnant and the calf is still alive. So essentially they get caught. They have to get rid of all the meat. So they couldn't even keep the meat, nor would the elders because they didn't kill it themselves, and it wasn't done in an honorable way, nobody kept the meat.
Which means essentially they've just murdered those beasts for no reason.
elk. Yeah.
They're not using any. Oh, wow.
So then the novel, I believe it starts this way. We encounter the 4 Blackfeet men a decade later, and they're being haunted and hunted by elk and elk-like beings.
Oh, my God.
And they need to come to terms with the mistakes of their past and understand why they need to embrace and respect traditions if they intend to continue to identify as Blackfeet, but also, live in a contemporary culture. So it illuminates Native American life from the inside. It shows how old traditions against modern life collide, but also can coalesce. And it also, according to the author, said he shines a light on how not all Native Americans are the same. Their struggles with preserving tradition and culture while trying to become a participant in contemporary lifestyle is often conflict.
Yes.
It's often...
Oh, God. That's why representation is so important, because I think there's such a tendency to create monoliths out of cultures and to believe that, everyone from this group acts the same way, which is ludicrous because no one works that way. That's not how any culture works.
And Stephen Graham Jones is part of Blackfeet Nation as well. So I think, it's really great insight because we talk a lot about pagan folklore or folk horror, but this is a different aspect of
Certainly.
folk horror.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand Native American experience isn't always, of course, the horror they experience by being driven from their lands, but also, as the author says himself, they're not all the same. It's not... Native Americans have violence as well,
Oh, absolutely. No,
they participate in violence.
They were
as
nations
well. So
unto themselves
it's a way
that
to
warred with each other and fought.
Understand the full picture in a way where I haven't typically encountered horror written and depicting Native Americans.
Ooh, there was a really good indigenous zombie movie out of Canada a year or two ago called Blood Quantum.
But it's pretty rare,
cool.
and I doubt that it was fully
rare.
all Native.
No, it was actually. It was an indigenous cast and an indigenous crew,
that's
and
good.
It was a big deal. It's actually a pretty decent movie too. But that along with Prey coming out this year, which side note is awesome. Watch Prey on Hulu. It's so good. We both really liked it.
So The Only Good Indians. Stephen Graham Jones.
I want to read that. I'm very excited. So my last, is it me? My last one, I'm going to talk about the films of Ben Wheatley, who, in my opinion, is the absolute master of folk horror working these days. He's a fascinating filmmaker with just when you think you get a handle on this guy, he announces, he does a series of independent, slow burn folk horror movies that are not very accessible. And then his next movie coming out is a sequel to The Meg with Jason Statham. That's coming out, next year or something. So sure.
Shark movie?
Yeah, the giant prehistoric shark movie. He's doing not only is he doing a big blockbuster Jason Statham shark movie, it's a sequel.
Interesting.
To a movie he didn't direct. It's amazing. So I always love when somebody throws a curveball like that. I'll probably see it just because Ben Wheatley directed it. But so Ben Wheatley, his first foray into this was 2011's Kill List, which is one of my absolute favorites of this genre, and one that my beloved co-host does not care for.
I do watch these, though.
She does. Oh, listen. Laura,
I do.
When I say we disagree, that is in no way meant to imply that one's taste is better than the other.
I secretly watched Midsommar because you had asked me to watch it many, many times, and I was like, I don't know. But I watched it in secret because I didn't want someone hovering over me demanding what I thought. And
Fair
I
enough.
actually came away, and of all of these folk horror movies, I would say that one is one of my favorites.
That's why I wanted you to watch it, because we saw Hereditary together. And disclaimer, Hereditary is my second favorite horror movie of all time. I have seen it 5 times. I adore it. It is a masterpiece.
You can love horror, and certain movies and types might not be for you.
100%. Well, like I said, I totally understand.
I see the horror in it. I just don't ever want to see it again.
I think your issue was it was maybe one of the most disturbing movies we've ever seen.
So disturbing. Well, when you said that about how, the slow burn makes you so uncomfortable and disgust, so much just dread and disgust. I don't think that I like to feel that way when I'm entertaining myself.
I am a freak. I love it. My favorite kind of horror movie is one that leaves me feeling a little sick inside.
So back to your movie recommendations.
Right. So Ben Wheatley, 2011's Kill List is the one you really should check out. It is, oh boy, it's a rough one. It stars Neil Maskell and Michael Smiley. Michael Smiley you've seen him a million. He's in everything. He's a great character actor. He's in tons and tons of stuff. He was in Rogue One. It was probably his biggest role. But they play 2 hitmen who have been partners for years, and they don't really explore, but something happened on their last job that deeply traumatized Jay, the main character. So he's not been working. And he's married to Shell, played by the incredible Mayanna Buring, who you might recognize from The Witcher. So Jay and Gal, they end up taking another job because Jay is financially desperate. Things start to go strangely. They're hired by a very wealthy person. Things in Jay's life start to really unravel. He sees things that aren't there. People start manipulating him. And there's a scene very reminiscent of Rosemary's Baby where he goes to visit his doctor, but it's not his doctor. It's a new person. And the new doctor is telling him all sorts of different shit. So, it's like the townspeople are in on it, and they're sort of directing Jay and manipulating him. And it all builds towards an absolutely fucking bananas ending.
Do you think that it's similar to The Wicker Man in a way because the ending?
Absolutely.
I feel like it's definitely an homage.
It really plays on the similarity with The Wicker Man and Kill List is both of the main characters are targeted from the very beginning by the townspeople, and throughout the movie they are groomed and conditioned into a state of psychological distress that makes them basically, it's like fattening up the calf for a sacrifice. So by the time Sergeant Howie is burned in The Wicker Man, he's out of his goddamn mind. He's like a raving lunatic. He's been deeply traumatized. And by the time Jay gets to the ending, and I am not going to give away anything about it because there's a massive twist, and it is, woo. But by the time he reaches that, he is broken because of systematic taking down psychologically, spiritually.
Gaslighting.
A lot of it is gaslighting. A lot of it is lying. There are some supernatural elements, but not it's more hinted at.
Yeah.
This is really a movie about human monsters, but holy
how they can
crap.
Psychologically dismantle you and make you so dependent.
The ending of this movie is it's quite bleak, and it left me gasping for air. Now, Ben Wheatley, another film of his I highly recommend, and I'm gonna level with you. This one is tough. It is very hard to get into. It's a field in England. It's black and white, very small cast, small budget. It's about...
Is Cillian Murphy in it?
No.
Oh.
No. Michael Smiley's in it. It takes place during the English Civil War, so that the time of Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads and all that. It's deeply hallucinatory and allegorical. There's a lot of mushroom tripping scenes in this movie. I argue that it absolutely makes sense, but maybe not at first. You really have to pay attention. It helps if you know a bit about that time period, honestly. It's written, the dialogue is very contemporaneous to that time period, so it's not very accessible. It's really kind of an old morality tale about, the devil and temptation and all that, but God damn, it is an experience. If you're one of those people that can just kind of go along for the ride, maybe stop worrying so much about the narrative and plot points and just let go and experience the journey the director's taking you on, there's nothing like this movie. It actually feels like you're hallucinating at certain points. But really anything by Ben Wheatley, he's a fascinating filmmaker. Sightseers, In the Earth. He doesn't always make folk horror, but it is the well he keeps going back to. And for my money, he's just one of the most interesting directors out there because I've seen all of his movies and I can't predict what the hell he's going to do next.
Mm-hmm. I know that there won't be one attendee to his next movie, and that's me.
Yeah,
but that's okay.
That's fair.
Okay.
I mean,
so
we're not clones of each other.
I know. Thank goodness.
No one wants that.
My last recommendation is True Detective Season 1.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Starring Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. So this season, there's 3 seasons of True Detective currently, and
with a fourth
each
coming.
of them with the 4th coming. Each of them tell their own story, but I specifically am focusing on this for the folk horror episode because there are folk horror elements in this story. So just a brief, this season's about a pair of detectives who once worked on mysterious murder, are now being questioned in present day due to a recent similar murder. And because the case files of the original case were destroyed in Hurricane Katrina, the 2 detectives need to sort of reopen their memories to detail what happened with their case. So Matthew McConaughey plays Russ Cole, who's no longer a detective. He was called the taxman because of a large notebook he carried where he took notes, drew pictures, blah, blah, blah. Against Harrelson's Marty Hart, who's a philandering, divorced, now private investigator. So the original case was never solved, and Marty and Russ reconnect to answer the original crime. So why I'm talking about this with the folk horror episode is Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow is a play in a book form.
Yes.
And it's said to have secrets of the cosmos, which is also said to induce madness in the reader. The King in Yellow borrows the name Carcosa from Ambrose Bierce, who wrote a short story called An Inhabitant of Carcosa, which is a tale of a man who's in unfamiliar wilderness, and after a time of trying to figure out where he is and how he got there, he discovers his own grave. So he's dead.
Listener, read Ambrose Bierce.
Right. So both the Yellow King and Carcosa are references and themes throughout the entire season of True Detective. There's a spiral symbol that makes appearances in visions and in reality through like twig lattice structures and called devil nets.
Yeah, the idea of like a vortex.
Yep.
Like a void. Yeah.
Right. There are also takes from the text The King in Yellow as found in a notebook of one of the murdered sex workers. There are allusions to madness, existentialism, fear of the unknown. The detectives are ultimately truth seekers, albeit flawed ones, who shine a light on the darkness. So there's definitely that juxtaposition of darkness being, in ritual, kept hidden, and these detectives really work hard to shine light on it. The folk of it all is really within the class division. The mainstream of the middle classes and working rural communities seen as the folk.
It takes place in Louisiana, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm saying like the word folk. You're folky. Folk.
For sure.
They're seen as the folk. And the objects come to be associated with poor whites who cling to the land and ruin buildings left behind by industrial growth of the larger cities. So then again, we have the old ways against, emerging technology or modernity. That
the inexorable march of progress.
So it's a hold. It's sort of these folks that are sort of attached to this ritual, the Yellow King, the Carcosa, these symbols and sacrifice that they ultimately make. at one point there's a video of masked figures performing a horrifying, which we don't even see. The viewer doesn't even see, but her horror is so implied that I feel like I know what's happening. Even though I can't tell you what was happening on the video, I feel like I know. And it's a ritual which includes the Yellow King. So there's this ritualistic aspect of these practices that these, poor, marginalized, white, rural inhabitants are still holding on to. Like, it's their source of power and control, because they also have people that are part of this community that are not poor. Yes. They are very rich. They are well connected. They don't live in the rural communities. They still participate in practice. And so this is an extension of Southern Gothic. It has like that horror, death, romance. The events appear to be supernatural, but ultimately are natural. They happen by natural consequence.
It does such a good job of exploring the uniquely American folklore that is really a pastiche of many different cultures. Yeah. Due to the nature of this country and how it came to be.
So why I'm recommending this is it's a really great foray into folk horror, because it's not essentially the season is a modern representation of detectives, but the story that's grounding this season is folk horror.
Yes.
And so you can dip your toe in and see, oh, am I intrigued by this? And then if you are, you can maybe check out some of the more, listen, if you're not into folk horror, you don't know you are, I wouldn't recommend Kill List as your first watch.
That's fair. It's a little...
See if you like True Detective Season 1.
That's a great point, actually. It can
be polarizing, as we've already discussed, between these two poles.
Certainly.
But tandem poles.
Quick shout out to two extremely talented actors, Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, who I think give
amazing.
Both of them give the best performances of either of their careers in this season.
I would argue that Dallas Buyers Club for Matthew McConaughey is on equal par. It's
I
on
could
the
listen
same...
to his character go on and on about whatever for hours. And Cary Joji Fukunaga directed all of the first season, and it is a masterpiece.
Yes,
he went on to direct No Time to Die, and I'm excited to see. He was actually the original director of It before Andy Muschietti came on, when he cast Will Poulter as Pennywise, but then left due to creative differences.
So I would say, we've given you some wide range of folk horror to try out, books, TV, films. There's a book called The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher.
I just read that.
That Richard just read.
Oh, it's good, everyone.
Folk
it's
horror.
Really good.
Blair Witch Project has a little folk horror element.
Well, and especially, I don't know if you remember, I very much remember this, the way they marketed that movie as if it was true.
Yeah.
It penetrated the American
I thought
consciousness.
It was true when I saw it, because I saw it the night it opened.
Half the people I saw it with thought it was true.
It made me physically ill, though.
I thought it was true
camera.
When I first saw the trailers, because that's how they were marketing it. It penetrated the American consciousness to the point where it became a modern folktale.
Yeah, so if you like that movie, then, there may be elements, of folk in that you are drawn to. Also more contemporary Antlers, which we recently saw.
Yeah. With
also
Kerry Russell?
Kerry Russell and what's her name's husband?
Oh, gosh.
Kirsten Dunst's husband.
Oh, Jesse Plemons.
Yes.
Yeah,
Jesse
he's
Plemons.
Fantastic. Right.
I'm sure he doesn't mind being referred to that way.
No, but I want to give
From Friday Night Lights.
A couple of quick references to a few movies that we didn't get into but are absolutely worth your time.
Make it quick.
Now, there's a new movie that just came out starring Noomi Rapace called You Won't Be Alone.
I love her.
Yes, it's awesome. There's a South African film that came out a year or two ago called Gaia.
Oh, we've never watched that, but I want to.
I did.
You did?
Oh, yeah.
Would I have not liked it?
It's pretty gross.
Okay. Well, I did just watch. What movie did I just watch? and I was like, oh, I'm watching this movie. I just watched it yesterday. It was really gross.
Oh, Fresh.
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
God.
Well, it's a cannibal movie. Those are always hard.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so Gaia makes a great companion piece, honestly, with Ben Wheatley's last film, In the Earth. They're different, but they both have an eco-horror kind of in the woods feel. Now,
Not into the woods.
Getting away from Western culture, if you want folk tales from other cultures, I highly recommend the films of the Indonesian director Joko Anwar, who's one of my favorites. Check out Satan's Slaves or Empedagore. There's also The Ritual and The Apostle, which are both on Netflix. Those are English films. But The Medium is a recent production from Thailand and South Korea. And these are folk horror and folk tales from just a non-Western culture. They share a lot of similarities, but there are quite a few differences because they are different cultures. And it's just fascinating to watch, to get an insight on the collective fears and the collective anxieties of a different culture, to see that there are so many things that we're all afraid of. And then there are other things that are more specific to the region and to the trials and tribulations that come with growing up in a certain part of the world. Definitely check out anything by Ben Wheatley, Ari Aster.
But only if you're comfortable with folk horror. I mean,
Yeah.
Listen, Richard's recommendations are for seasoned folk horror viewers.
I mean, maybe you like to jump in with both feet. Just hold your
If you're,
nose
like,
and jump right in, like me.
Totally into it.
Yeah.
Go for it. I mean, if you like horror, and then you can jump in.
But this is one of those cases where if I recommend a movie like this and someone says I hated it, I totally understand.
Yeah.
I
But
won't
if
push
you
back
are
on it.
intrigued by the topics that we're talking about and the themes we're talking about, and maybe aren't totally into horror, check out True Detective Season 1.
These kinds of stories tend to be quite uncomfortable, I think, to modern Western audiences because they deal a lot with birth, femininity, menstruation, fertility cycles, the poison of the patriarchy, and some people are not comfortable discussing things like that or thinking about things like that.
And I'm just looking out for our listener who may or may not want to venture that deep into folk horror.
As with all of our recommendations, it's a horror podcast, so
Yeah.
some of these things are nasty, but we'll always try to point out which movies are like a little bit more hardcore than others.
Absolutely.
So-
Well, we did it.
Oh
We're
my
back,
gosh.
you guys. We're back.
Listen, we're going to be coming back to this because we're going to be talking about elements of folk horror like witches and things like that.
We have a whole October plan.
I really want to convey that I am so enthusiastic about this because I deeply, deeply love this subgenre.
I think that applies to any of our episodes.
Absolutely. But
And we're enthusiastic to be back with you, and we'll see you next week.
I feel like you're trying to get me off the mic again.
I am, because I have to go back to work.
I have
said I
another-
only have till 1.
I have another 15
There's 6 minutes
of rambling.
I gotta set up, and
Sit
I
there
haven't even
quiet.
eaten my lunch.
Bye, everybody.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Hispanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're still